Welcome to Biology for Bastards. Alright, never going to do that again. Welcome to the first episode of Biology for Bastards, teaching biology in the most profane way you've ever seen or heard. I am your host, John Doty, and before we get going today, just a little background on what this podcast is going to be about. I am an actual biology teacher at a public school. I do teach biology, mostly to freshmen. So you can see how that would put me in a position where there's a lot of people who aren't really paying attention to what the heck I'm talking about. And sometimes I just really wish I could swear in class and it would help get my point across. And that's kind of how this podcast came to be. What I'm going to do over the course of this season is go through the AP Biology curriculum. So if you are in AP Biology now and you're in high school, you should probably pay attention in class. It would help you more than this podcast. If you're not, then great. Just follow along. I'm going to be referring to chapters from books. It's Campbell Biology. It's a really big AP Biology textbook. I don't remember what edition it is, 8th or 9th. It's pretty much all the same. Chapters haven't changed order. But we're just going to get started with Chapter 1 and kind of introduce what the heck biology and science actually is. So this one's going to be a little bit shorter than some of the other ones. I haven't really figured out if I'm going to do long episodes as the chapters get longer or multiple episodes per chapter. We'll kind of wing it because that's kind of the bastard way. So first up, Introduction to Biology, Chapter 1. Let's get going. So, as we probably all know, even the most bastardly among us, is that biology is the study of life. Ology, the study of life. So that one should be pretty straightforward. That's pretty much how this whole chapter goes. So we'll get into this much, much later in the season, but there's all these different types of life. We've got different domains. We've got bacteria, we've got archaea. Those are both known as prokaryotes. If these words don't make sense, well, you suck. Just kidding. Or not. We'll get there. Okay, and then we've got all these other eukaryotes, like plants and fungi and animals and all this other stuff. But no matter what, if we're talking about a plant or a fungus or a bacterium or an archaea, anything like that, all life is going to have the same kind of principles that we use to define what life is. Okay? And some of those are, the ability to process energy. You got to eat stuff, and you're going to turn that into shit and get rid of that to stay alive, because otherwise you die, and then you're not biology anymore. Okay? You're going to grow and develop. As you do eat shit and turn it into more shit, you're going to grow, you're going to get bigger, you're going to develop and get more complex. Those are two different things, growing and developing. Very similar, and they tend to go hand in hand, but they are different. Living things are going to reproduce to get more living things. That's in the case of a lot of things, sex. In the case of a lot of other things, not sex. Sucks to be them. Life along the way is going to evolve. The whole survival of the fittest, which I'm not going to get into it now. I promise I will get into it later. I absolutely hate the term survival of the fittest. It's a terrible term. I'm going to get on a soapbox and a rant on a later chapter and just go off how it's so fucking dumb and how it's just ass backwards and it gives the wrong freaking idea. I just absolutely hate it. Anyways, life has order to it. There's some sort of, things aren't just randomly put out there. There's, cells and tissues and organs, all that stuff. And then living things are going to both respond to their environment and regulate their internal environment somehow, some way. So, kind of some big ideas in the world of AP biology and just biology in general, because, big ideas in AP biology should match up with the big ideas in regular biology. But perhaps the biggest one is that evolution is going to be at the heart of everything. It's going to drive the diversity and the unity of life. So if you look outside your window, hopefully you have a window. If not, you're in a dungeon, and I'm sorry. Hope everything's good down there in your little dungeon hole. Make sure you put the lotion on the skin. But every type of life that you see out there, it's all different, but it's all the same. It all came from the same place. Long, long time ago. We call it Luca, the last universal common ancestor. And since then, it's been changing to all the different life forms that you see or you know about today. And what's crazy is that all the different life forms there are, they work in generally the same way, which is what allows us to talk about the stuff that you talk about in biology, because you can generalize and apply it to all different types of life forms. So that's the biggest idea in biology, is that everything kind of goes back to evolution. The next big idea is that biological systems, whether we're talking about an organism, we're talking about an ecosystem, we're talking about things in between, we'll need to use both energy and molecules to grow, to reproduce, and to maintain homeostasis. That's to respond to the environment and to regulate the internal environment that I was talking about before. It's basically saying biology does not exist in a vacuum. Biology is connected with everything. That's called ecology. That'll be at the very end of this season. But that's it for that one. It's pretty straightforward, that things have to interact. And in interacting, they are going to change the environment, change the world for everything else. The next big idea is that we're going to have to somehow store, retrieve, and transmit information to power all of this life. That we know is the work of DNA, but we'll go into how DNA does its job, how it stores information, how it transmits that information. We'll do it later. And then very, very similar to the second big idea is the fourth one, that those systems that we talk about, using the energy, using the molecules, those are going to interact. And by doing so, things are going to get fucking crazy. And magic powers are going to happen where you have things that are more than the sum of their parts. That's going to be a big phrase to kind of think about later. But all that is the basis of biology. But biology is a branch of science. And by being a branch of science, it's going to have things in common with a lot of other science. Okay, so at the heart of science is the idea of inquiry, which is a big fucking word. Well, actually, it's not too big. It's like 7 letters. But it's a fancy word that just means, searching, thinking, wondering. Science is all about wondering, which is not surprising considering it comes from the Latin word meaning to know some information, to know an explanation. And there's really 2 types of science. There's discovery science and a hypothesis-based science. Discovery science is kind of what it sounds like. You discover something. Observation, analyzing data, or data if you're weird. Okay? That is your discovery science. You'd have this information, qualitative data, quantitative data, qualitative being the descriptors, green, tall, short, fat, round, dumb, stupid, ugly, whatever, and quantitative being numbers, things you can actually count, 5, 10, 20, 30, whatever. But that's all discovery science. So we've done a lot of the discovery science up till now. That age is kind of past because we've found out a bunch of stuff that's easy to find out just by discovery. So a lot of science is hypothesis-based science, where you come up with a hypothesis, which do not fucking say it's an educated guess. If you are, you're like 12 in middle school. I don't even know if that's how old you are in middle school, but that's a terrible, terrible definition of hypothesis. It's the worst shit ever to do because it's not a guess. It is educated, but it's definitely not a guess. What it is, it's your best explanation that you can come up with that you're going to try to prove wrong. That's what a hypothesis is. You're going to try to prove yourself wrong, saying this is not what's happening. And you can either support it, that you couldn't refute your hypothesis, or you will refute it and say, well, this is not what happens. So if I punch you in the face, then you're going to cry like a little baby. That's a hypothesis. That's something that I can test out. I can punch you in the face and see if you cry. If you don't cry, well, my hypothesis was wrong. I would change my hypothesis. If my hypothesis was valid, I punch you in the face, then it will cry. That doesn't mean every time. That doesn't mean a punch to the face will make you cry, because what if a little child punched you in the face? Hopefully you would not cry. If you did, you kind of deserved it, probably. All right, but that's what a hypothesis is. It's an explanation for something based on all the information that you have, and you're going to see if you can prove it wrong. And as you go through and do that, you're going to perform experiments. Now, I'm kind of talking around this idea of the scientific method because the scientific method is a fucking dumb thing. And if anybody's ever made you memorize the steps of the scientific method, I am so absolutely sorry that they wasted your time, because the scientific method is bullshit. It just is. And I'm going to say it because I just did. I'm going to say it again. The scientific method is bullshit. Because they talk about it like, well, first you make observations, and then you come up with a hypothesis, and then you conduct an experiment and gather data and analyze that data and revise your conclusion or whatever. Bullshit is what it is. Because something as simple as trying to charge your phone, that's the scientific method. Your phone's dying, you plug it into the charger, that's an experiment. Based on all the information you've ever had, plugging phones into walls and the power's on the phone's low, it charges, that's your hypothesis. If I plug my phone in, then it's going to charge. If that doesn't work, you try to fix it. The scientific method is just problem solving. That's all science is. So the idea that there's all these different stages is absolute bullshit. Moving on. Now, when you do have experiments, because experiments are very important. Scientific method, it's this made up thing, try to organize things, but experiments, very important to science. You have your hypothesis, which we've already talked about. What you try to do is you try to have a control group and an experimental group. And very simply put, because we're keeping this nice and simple, the control is what you're going to compare everything to. It's normal. That's quote unquote normal. It's unchanged. The experimental group, you change one thing. And that one thing that you change is known as the independent variable. Because that one thing that you have absolute control over will determine whether or not your dependent variable fucking changes. That's it. Everything else stays the same between the two groups. They remain constant. You want as many trials as possible. You're really just looking at that one variable. Back to my hypothesis earlier about punching in the face. The punch, I control. Your face, that's what I'm punching. I control that. I'm seeing if you cry. The crying would be my dependent variable because it depends on whether or not I punch you in the face. So I could punch you in the face with my fist, that's one group. I could punch you in the face with a stapler in the other group. That's my experimental. I can see if there's a difference. Now, as time goes on, you have your hypothesis. You can test it out, either support or refute it. After a bunch of different hypotheses get tested and you get the same results every single time, that can transition into a theory. Scientific theories are not the everyday definition of the word theory. Everyday people use the word theory like it's an educated guess. It's a prediction. They have no fucking clue what's going on. They're like, oh, I got a theory. But in science, a theory is as true as something can get. It's going to explain something. The theory of gravity, the theory of evolution, germ theory, that germs make you sick and not voodoo curses or witchcraft or anything like that. Cell theory, that we're made of cells. Those are all theories. They explain things. Supported by all the evidence out there, because if there's evidence that contradicts a theory, the theory's got to change, or it's got to be able to explain it. Now, don't discount theories because there's scientific laws out there. Laws are also very true, but they tend to just explain something. They don't describe how it works. I like to think of laws more as mathematical equations or statements. If you drop something, it's going to fall to the ground because of gravity. But the theory of gravity explains how gravity works, why that thing is going to fall to the ground. Okay, so hypotheses, theories, laws, they're all different, but they're all different steps or different types of science that happen out there. And with that, that brings us to the end of Chapter 1. Hopefully, you learned a little something. And we'll see you next time when we get into Chapter 2 and we start talking about fucking chemistry, which I know, it's a biology podcast. Why are we talking about chemistry? Cool your shit. You'll find out later. But until then, thanks for listening. This has been Biology for Bastards. I'm your host, John Doty. Don't forget to rate, subscribe, tell everybody about it. Let's get this thing going. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. One last thing, because this is the first episode, I'm bound to forget something. Hopefully that gets smoother at the end and there's not this little PS at the end. Rate, subscribe. I know I said that already a couple times, but it's really important to get that out there. But I needed to give a shout out to where our music's from. The song is, for our intro and outro, is Feeling Good by Purple Planet Music. Alright, later.